two words come up for me: permission and power. It's permission to rest. It's permission to be human. It's permission to make mistakes. It's permission to pivot, permission to quit, permission to cancel, permission to say no, permission to have the, an audacity to do the thing that you're called to do, to lean into your pleasure, your joy, permission to create a lifestyle centered on ease.
Welcome back to Bloom, Build, and Birth, the podcast where we talk about women, all of the phases and stages of life that we go through, and how to make it as easy as possible. Maybe not as easy, but with as much ease as possible as we flow through this life collectively and individually, supporting one another. Today, I am so thrilled to have Dr. Iman Hypolite on the show. I am, super fan of your warmth that you give us through social media, super fan of just the work that you put into yourself and into the community that you're growing, and so thrilled to have you today on the show. And I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hello, I am so happy to be here. I think we've both been fangirling each other because I am definitely a fan of your work, like and binge it and share it all the time. And I've been looking forward to doing this podcast because it definitely feels like a meeting of like minds and shared passions and values that we have for ourselves and for our community. And so I'm very happy to be here.
Yes. And so, everything that we do on Bloom, Build, and Birth is around that framework. And that's the framework that I've developed for Her Hive Collective. And so, as you know, from what we talked about before, I want us to really think about kind of those phases, right? My hypothesis is that we go through them over and over and over again, right? It's not as if we can say, okay, I've been through that, done with that. You might come back to that at some point in your life. And I would love to talk with you about what you speak up when it comes to like that soft life. What is a soft life, Dr. Hypolite? What does that mean? What's the concept?
So the soft life for me, I like to start off with what it's not. It's not an aesthetic. It's not performative. It's not assigned to a particular lifestyle or socioeconomic status. What it is, and how I, in its most simplest terms, define it, is self-care plus self-love equals the soft life. And so more specifically, what I mean by that is just really tapping into, being self-aware about what you need to grow, to be the fullest version of you, to be the healthiest version of you. It's about having healthy boundaries, taking care of yourself, mind, body, and spirit. And so that may look like, different things for different people, but it really is a life of ease. Not easy, as you start off saying, it's not easy. I'm not going to say there's nothing easy about it. And it oftentimes takes sacrifice to actually live it. But it is a life of ease, a life of healthy boundaries, of sustainability, in that it really just celebrates our humanity and our sovereignty.
Yeah, I love that you said that it's not an aesthetic. And I think that can be lost on us as women. It's like, I long for the soft life where maybe it's just less stress or whatever, but really it's far more of an embodiment. It seems like it's far more of boundary setting. I had a conversation with another woman a few weeks ago, and she was talking about her aspiration, right? She aspires to have a soft life, but thinking about the work that goes into that, what would you say are some of the biggest sort of tenets that a woman needs to remember and keep in mind if she wants to experience and maintain a softer life?
Yeah, the path to a soft life can sometimes be jarring because sometimes it's a lot of shedding. For most of us, it's a lot of shedding and unlearning. And that initial phase to get to it can feel absolutely dysregulating. And so oftentimes we need supports to get there because you're sounding off all kind of alarms because you're going against the grain. You're doing the opposite of what you were programmed and conditioned to do. You're breaking the rules. And a lot of times there is pushback from the systems and the people that have come to rely on our labor. And so the path to it can be a bit rocky up front, but it is absolutely worth it. And it definitely gets easier with time. And so I would say, the path to the self life is one oftentimes of simplifying. We have such busy and cluttered lives, and that it's really about a honing and a refining of what matters most, what we value most. And one of the simplest things, kind of frameworks for it is what energizes you and leaning into that, and what depletes you and mitigating that. If we can't remove it, then we'll mitigate it. And I think those two questions, what depletes you and what repletes you or restores you, those are oftentimes the kind of foundational questions that will lead someone to their version of their soft life.
Yeah. And that speaks to metacognition, right? I think especially for those of us who are high achieving, who set very high standards for ourselves and those around us, right? We can get very caught up in the rules or the standard, or this didn't hit that button, or this didn't hit that target. So how do we as high achieving women begin to think about our thinking and then possibly reimagine, or to your point, shed, what are some steps that you take as a mental health expert, as a wellness expert? What can we do to support ourselves in that hard sort of path to soft?
Yeah, there's so many ways to get at it. And that's a lot of like what therapy does. It is, especially therapies that are based on like cognitive behavioral therapy, because cognitive is the thinking. How are we thinking? The behaviors are the actions that follow. In terms of ways to get at that, there are many strategies, many techniques, but it really is the embodiment of self-awareness. Start like, what are we thinking? How are we feeling? What are we doing? How are we being? How are we showing up? And so in my work with women, oftentimes I start with doing a values clarification exercise, like a values assessment.
Yes.
And I look at what, I just kind of start off with a rough kind of exercise, like just getting to your top 10 to 15 values. And then from there, I say, which ones of these are aspirational versus which ones are like foundational and been persistent, and which ones of these are maybe inherited or projected onto you. And then we go through a process of refining that list of values. And oftentimes what that does is it shows like some of our common patterns of how we get stuck, because I narrow that list down and I refine it. And so it's an exercise that we can do, that I often do, that will reveal the areas where we have friction in our lives, the areas where we have indecision in our lives, the areas where we may procrastinate. And it really just helps us in a very tangible way, because sometimes this can get very abstract and just feel overwhelming. And so I really have learned, especially with Black women leaders who can be very rule bound, and just, want efficiency and want clarity and, don't do well with uncertainty. Over the years, I've just developed a framework to help simplify that and make it feel tangible and real to us and accessible.
Yeah.
So I think, getting really in touch with one's core values are, what their core beliefs are, and the things that cause friction against that. And then we practice paying attention to that, noticing it, not necessarily changing at first, but just learning to notice and to be aware what's coming up. The other thing, the other way I access that too is with parts work. And so, when things come up that, there's something, maybe a negative feeling or emotion or belief that's come up, doing a lot of investigating. What part is that? So a lot of times it's the inner child, a lot of times it's our inner teen, who's angry and upset, our inner villain, the inner villain and that inner teen in cahoots together. Let me tell you. Another big one for us is our inner critic, our harsh critic, our perfectionist. And so another way of getting at that is what part of us is speaking. And so all of us have different parts of our personality and our being. And so in part of my work, I really work to let's get to know them and what are the stories they're carrying and how can we be grateful to them all because they all are working for our greater good in their own way, whether it's healthy or not, thanking for them and bringing them in order. and really elevating and empowering and getting to know our highest self, which is the part of us that's most aligned with our values and the women that we're called to be.
So yes to all of that. And you did not have to cuss me out and call me out on the...
My bad.
How much are you paying for your cell phone? Because if it's more than $15 a month, it's too much. If it's more than $30 a month, it's too much. I pay $360 for the year. 12 months of service, $360. I pay it one time and forget about it. And I get unlimited data the entire year. If you're interested, click the link in my bio. You're going to go to Mint Mobile and sign up. Thank me later. Especially on the part about the procrastination. My goodness. Because you know what that for me is tied to? That procrastination is interlocked with the perfectionism.
Yeah.
For being a perfectionist and being a procrastinator, because it's like, I want to do it so perfect and so right. So not today. I'll try it again next week when I've perfected it, when I've got my chat GPT set up just right with it, when I've got my website perfect. And I told another woman this the other day, I will intentionally look for situations in like a business environment or a business setting where it's not perfect, whether it be a typo on, a newscast or something. It's like, but they still did it. They still got the production out.
How about that?
They still manage, that van that has a typo on the side of it, they still made that appointment, right? They still got that job that day. Yes. Nobody cared about the typo, right? And so that piece, and then you mentioned the team, that inner team.
Oof. Let me tell you.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because I don't know how many of us, I feel like a lot of us struggle with that. I'll tell you, my 17-year-old self ran my life for up until my early 40s, late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Oftentimes when we talk about parts, we focus on inner child, which is very powerful, definitely necessary. Sometimes you have to do inner child work to even get to the team. And we talk about our inner critic, but the inner team gets ignored a lot. And for a lot of us, like, that's so injuring, because for many of us high achievers, we ignored ourselves. We ignored it. We ignored our inner team. A lot of us were like the good girls, high achievers that followed the rules, checked the boxes. And so that's that season of life where we learn to censor so much, and where we are taught to be censored, and we're censored by our communities. And as much as they mean well and are trying to protect us and steer us in the right direction, it can be like life crushing, to have so many restrictions placed on us. And so oftentimes the inner teen is the part of us that's just very angry, like just a kind of primal old, like anger that's been with us for a long time. And so she cares a lot about things like fairness, like, I did X, Y, and Z, so why is it not working? Like, she tends to be in cahoots with our inner perfectionist. And she's the part of us that is the most censored. And I think oftentimes when we are showing up in our adult forms and we're having trouble with our voice and getting clear, speaking our truth, walking in our calling, and in the fear, like that throat chakra. Oftentimes it's that team that we really have to love on. Yes. And one of the best ways to access her is by, one, validating her anger, giving her permission, giving yourself permission to be angry. Yes. Understanding what's at the root of that anger, and loving on her and allowing her to be angry, because a lot of us too, a lot of us were raised to say, like, anger's not okay. Like, you can't, like, you better pull it together, or, put a smile on your face, fix your face. And so we're not allowed to be angry. So one is just permission to be angry. Oftentimes creating, like things, like allowing yourself to be creative, allowing yourself to rest. Oftentimes our teens are tired because she was the one staying up late, doing all the things, or, going to all of the activities and being in all the extracurriculars. And so, rest is another way. And then I'm blanking on the other way that I was going to share, but it's really just a softening, just a listening to yourself, a softening, and just really having a deep compassion, those ways that your soul kind of cries out, from, things that just feel unfair, or I did the right thing, so why isn't it showing? Like disappointment, I think is another thing that's in her domain, and allowing ourselves to sit with that and feel that.
That is so powerful. I mean, we could have a whole series, not even a show, like a whole series, I think, on that, because I honestly, that is to me, and this is going in a whole different direction, y'all, because this is such an important, I think, experience that women have. And there's something I believe, maybe there's a correlation there, but there's something I think that's tied to this stage of life, perimenopause, menopause, and that sort of reconnection with, I think, your angry teen self, right? Because all of the things that you maybe didn't have the ability to process completely at that stage, you still felt, you still experienced. And so now that you are very seasoned and you have the ability to process and maybe not remember them exactly the way they happened, but you remember how you felt it, how you experienced it, and I think, you mentioned earlier that the notion of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to know, as you're kind of juggling this stage of life, as you're, reviewing and maybe ruminating, even in some cases, on your past or where you are, going through so many transitions in your life, whether it be relationships or career, how do we, what is emotional regulation? What does it look like? What does dysregulation look like? And how do we lean into the regulation part of it more?
Right. Part of regulation, there's so much, I want to say so many things, so I'm going to try to focus and not go off too far.
It's so much, I know.
But one of the first things is we have romanticized, what nervous system regulation, has looked like social media and marketing, all that has caught hold to it. And it's just painted this very unrealistic narrative around it. But one of the first things that we have to do in order to be regulated is, for one, allow ourselves to feel all the emotions that humans feel. And so there's an allowing, and before you can allow, noticing it, noticing, oh, I feel this. Oh, I'm feeling that. I'm feeling this. And that can be very challenging. And that goes back to the metacognition, because, we're so used to just powering through, pushing through, that we're not paying attention to our cues, to what we're feeling, what we're thinking, and how it might be showing up in our body. We're not even aware. We're just used to hey, bottom line is X, Y, and Z. I need to get there. Forget all the bells and whistles that are going off. I just need to get there. So we have conditioned ourselves to operate like that. So one of the first phases or stages is just to be aware, become aware of what you're feeling, thinking, sensing. And then from there, understanding where it's causing friction. So triggered, how are we getting triggered? What is the quality of that triggering? What are the patterns in that, the things that frequently are triggering us? Understanding where that's coming from. And so that's one kind of stage of the work. And then the other work is just really engaging in practices that are calming and soothing and help pull us out of that sympathetic state of just grind, hustle, fight, flee, just pulling us out of that and
out of that reptilian brain.
that autopilot, and for Black women, we are heavily wired to live in that sympathetic, hyperactivated state. Because if you think about it, we're the most vulnerable in our in our culture, in the world that we live in, we are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we're going to be scanning for safety all the time, which is vigilance. Of course, we're going to be very much so attuned to, what feels threatening versus what feels safe, and how can we make things as safe as possible for ourselves and those around us. So we're very much so oriented to that. And so one of the things that we can do is just really start focusing on our own safety, and what does that mean for us, and how does that even feel? And so, really reestablishing a relationship with rest and sleep, those are absolutely foundational. It is, you can't regulate anything well if you're tired and exhausted,
Oh, that's right.
So, it's what we're
children show us that, right? Babies show us that.
It goes back to childhood. All we have to do is look at them, look at their tantrums. When we get triggered and get dysregulated, it's just an adult tantrum.
Right.
And so,
exactly.
What are the things that kids need? They need to eat regularly. They need to sleep. They need to be spoken to gently. And so that harsh critic that's always hating on us in our own heads, we have to develop a relationship with that part of us so that we're able to turn the volume down and speak more gently and kindly. So how are we thinking about ourselves? How are we treating ourselves? So that's where the self-care comes in. That's where the healthy self-talk comes in. So we have to create an internal safety. And of course, if there are any external things that are unsafe, we definitely need to have boundaries or barriers, and so that's where healthy boundaries come in. If something's truly abusive, that we need a whole wall, and that boundaries are not enough. But if it is, anything short of that, where it's not abusive, but it does cause harm, or it does deplete us, well, then we need to have some healthy boundaries around that. And so creating that sense of safety, really understanding our internal lives and the external lives and that interplay and finding our way to safety, that is what creates the conditions for nervous system regulation. Outside of that, it's unrealistic to expect that. And so with all the craziness going on in the world, a lot of people are like, I still want to be rigidly, I want to rigidly be regulated. And it's like, yeah.
Kind of like the antithesis to regulation, right?
Right.
And I think I saw a post earlier today from the Nat Ministry, whom I love. And it was talking about how basically it was a read because they were like, you're so busy looking for a trip to Bali. Oof. Or, getting on flights and doing all this, restorative stuff, like go to bed, basically. Go lay down.
Can we just start there?
For women who are high achieving, who don't know what it's like to rest, what is one way to start to rest and not feel guilty about it? To remove the guilt from rest.
You threw a wrench in it because it's easier. It's easier to get to rest, but sometimes it's that guilt that, is the harder part. And that goes a lot deeper. And so you want me to talk about the rest or the guilt part or a combination? Because it's
let's talk about the guilt.
The guilt. Okay.
Yeah.
The guilt part is deep. That's a wound for many of us.
Yeah.
So we really have to be extra compassionate. My word for this year is self-compassion. And my word last year was expansion, your word.
My word for this year, yeah.
And then I realized I've not finished that. And so it's compassionate expansion. And so, but one of the things I get excited talking about compassion, because in order for us to rest, we have to give ourselves permission to do it. And how do we give ourselves permission? We have to look at the rules and the things that we've been told, we've been telling ourselves about it. And oftentimes we say, I'll rest when I'm dead, or I rest when I deserve it. I rest when I've done all the things and I've checked all the boxes, then I can rest. I'll rest when external stressors are all taken care of. And those are unrealistic expectations and requirements, prerequisites that we're putting around rest. So we have to look at the narrative that we are telling ourselves about how we access rest and our right to it. We have to do a lot of unlearning around and divorcing ourselves from the external expectations that people have of us, because, people oftentimes will think, oh, if we're not working, if we're not maybe working out or at an event or doing something, well, then they get to access you. Well, then certainly you can help me with, certainly, and it's like rest is not just an absence of activity. Rest is absolutely essential to us. Like we can't grow, heal, restore, become, expand, evolve without it. And that's like nature. That's like biblical. Like that's like whatever, that's so foundational. And so we have to unlearn those stories that we tell ourselves. And so sometimes that's the hardest part. And so, that can look like just, reading things like, Tricia Hershey's book that she wrote, Rest is Resistance, and the work of Octavia Rahim and, other women who really study rest. It can also look like being in therapy, around it. It can also, it does I wish there was an easier way, but so much of our programming has been counter to our rest that there is a degree of work that we have to do to even get to it.
Yeah. And that's really I think about the journey a lot, whether it be a physical wellness journey, mental, like whatever it is, there's not like, okay, I have arrived. Similar to with the phases, you don't get to go from bloom to build to
Yeah.
birth and then you're done. They're all interrelated, they're all connected, and they all depend on each other. It's an interdependent sort of, just like a hive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
can't have a hive without the flower, which is the bloom. You can't have it without the worker bees, which is the building. And you
Mm-hmm.
can't have it without the queen, which is the birthing. And so what happens though for a woman who does get to be in that embodied, softer living that's not performative, it's
Yeah.
not, aesthetic? What does it look like? Because I think a lot of times we can't even imagine
How about that?
something. And it's so hard to even step into it if you have never seen it with your own family or your own friend circle. You don't know how to even kind of experience that. So what does psychological sovereignty even look like once you have reached that embodied state of a softer life?
Yeah. Two words come up for me: permission and power. It's permission to rest. It's permission to be human. It's permission to make mistakes. It's permission to pivot, permission to quit, permission to cancel, permission to say no, permission to have the, and audacity to do the thing that you're called to do, to lean into your pleasure, your joy, permission to create a lifestyle centered on ease. It is permission to be, and that's so hard. Like not doing, so much of our value is based on our work, our labor, but it's permission, like it is permission to be sans that, just being and receiving. And for, I'm a Christian, and I don't necessarily bring that into my work in a very, kind of overt way, but it definitely informs me, or, on the spiritual side rather than the religious, but sovereignty is also like a receiving, a surrendering and receiving to a power that's greater than you. So like downloading that power from an external source so that you're giving from a state of overflow and not, your own reserves. And so to me, like sovereignty is that wholeness, and pouring out from a place of wholeness rather than, struggle and scrapping and, like
Struggle love, yeah.
Struggle love, like, so it's the opposite of struggle love. And then the power is just, it is the result of that. It's the result of being a well-rested woman. It's the result of being a woman who has, received her daily download from her higher power and is pouring out from that. It is the direct result for me of the rest, the self-care, and the soft life. And so, and that power is, just really walking in who you're called to be in a sustainable way, in a rested way, in a loving way. And just, being that woman, becoming and being that woman.
Yeah. And thinking about her, because I want anyone who's listening or watching this to be able to close their eyes and envision themselves stepping into and being, to your point, being that person. Even when I meet women, one of the first things that we'll say to each other, which I want us to really think about and stop, is what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? What do you do? And I get it, right? It's maybe not meant to be a negative, but there's so much more to me. There's so much more to you than our titles, our letters behind our names. There's so much more. I try to ask people, like, what's your passion? What are you passionate about? What's keeping you up at night for good reasons or bad reasons? Like, what I want to know the being part. And for you, whether it's friendship or family or romantic, how does this shift change how I show up? How does it change how a woman shows up in relationships?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. It can oftentimes cause some friction at first. When you really step into, the queen phase of your life, that becoming phase of your life, sometimes your light might be too bright for some people. A lot of us have been living our lives, according to a rule book that was not created by us or for us to contain us and to keep us small. And so when we, bloom and become and outgrow that and actually walk in who we're called to be, that can sometimes cause other people to feel uncomfortable, not necessarily from a place of, malice, but like it can trigger them because maybe they might not yet be at that phase where you are. Yeah. But and in other ways, it's the boundaries that come out of that. You become very clear on what works for you and what doesn't, where you have flexibility and where you may not. And so that's going to cause some friction in some relationships, and it may lead to shedding of some relationships. It may lead to strengthening of some others. And so your relationships are going to look very different. But if and when we stick to this path, I'm still on this path, I am seeing and I know and I believe that it definitely leads to a richer, quality of life and a richer circle of people, alignment, and when we are living in alignment and amongst people with whom we are aligned, that is what fulfillment looks and feels like. That's what sovereignty looks and feels like. And I think when more of us are doing that, when we, hive up, like when we are whole and we're able to relate to one another from a place of wholeness, that's what I'm excited about. Like that's what I am praying for, looking for, working towards. Like that is what I'm passionate about. And I believe like that's where the change is going to happen. That's where the chains are going to break. Like that's where we find our way out of the some of the circumstances that we're in now. Yeah. It is something that is unfolding, personally for me, and some of the women I work with, I've seen it happen for them, and I see it happening for them, and like they're unstoppable. It's just like, like, wow, I get excited when I see it, and we might not have a lot of examples of it, but or highly visible, because not everybody, is, we're not performative, so a lot of us, it's not something that is advertised. But I do thank you for the work that you do, because you're showing it, you are showing the process, you are showing the work. And one of your posts a while back was like, when it's one thing to be looked at and observed and another thing to be seen. It's this, I see you, I see what you're sharing, and I see the intentionality behind it. And the significance, and by living it and doing it like on camera and sharing it with us, you are giving us permission to do it as well. And also, showing like, here's an example of what it looks like. Here's a version of it. We need different versions of us doing it because, I think the wellness industry has largely been co-opted by capitalism, and there is a specific brand and aesthetic and even, people group that we're accustomed to seeing, folks living well and living, full lives. But we need to show our versions of it and what it can look like, in our communities. And so, yeah.
I appreciate you. Thank you for that. It's messy, right? Like it's messy.
Very much so.
It's a very messy shedding. And I think doing it, to your point, on camera, and obviously, someone was saying, well, it's curated. Well, our whole lives are curated, right? Yeah. We only share with certain people what we want to share, what we deem as safe, or what we want to give them. Mm-hmm. So of course it's curated, but I think for those of us like yourself who do share pretty raw and pretty revealing aspects of our shedding, of our journey into this softness, that's the whole reason why I do it. That's the whole reason why we are having this conversation. And to those who are listening, there is a funny story and a connection, like a little thread through this conversation. Even when I was going through one of the most difficult parts of my life, as I was leaving corporate, going through a very traumatic, actually, separation from the corporate, world, I reached out to 8 people on, whatever, I think it was Alma.com or whatever their website is. I'll share it because it is a good resource. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Hypolite was on that list, and it was solely because you looked amazing and beautiful. And like me, I'm like, yes, she's someone who I can talk to. Now, I'll be honest, I personally prefer my care providers to have lived experiences that are like mine. Yeah. Because I don't want to have to tell you what's wrong with me and translate why this might be wrong with me, or why this is impacting me in a different way than it might impact another client of yours. And so for me, it's the shorthand
Yeah.
that I look for. And not to say that every provider who is a woman or every provider who is Black is going to have that shorthand. That doesn't, because I've had one experience rather,
Mm-hmm.
where it was not, the translation was not translating. Okay. So I know it's not 100%, but for the most part, it is there. And I will tell y'all, in my haze, I missed her email. She had responded, I think the same day as I reached out, and I missed it. And so I ended up working with a different care provider. But then fast forward like a year, I'm like following her. She's following me on Instagram. I'm doing the content creation thing. It's going up. And I'm like, wait a minute, I know this last name. It's not a very common last name. And she's a doctor. Like, this must be the same person. I went back and looked in my email, my sent mail, and sure enough, this is the same doctor who I had reached out to. And I'm like, wow, I was almost your client, almost your patient.
Wow.
It's so funny. And so it's very full circle. And I'm so grateful in this moment to be able to be in a way better place, right?
Yes.
And to be able to be having this conversation. And I would still, of course, have loved to be on your couch, but this isn't even, it's still therapeutic in a way for myself, for anyone who is listening right now. And I'm so grateful for the way that it's, used the word earlier, unfolded.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting and beautiful process. Mm-hmm. I know I just talked way too long, but I'm, grateful.
No, I am too. I'm just full. I'm full. When things align and are ordered the way they meant to be, I just get quiet because that there's something to that. And so I'm happy we connected in the way that we ultimately have.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that our work, our values, and what we're just trying to do for women like us just definitely align. So I'm happy to partner with you in the way that I am now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. You said that, you mentioned that my word for this year, your word for last year was expansion. I'd like, real quick, before we get into our hot takes and our lightning round, what does expansion look like when it's not tied to overexertion? Because I'll be honest, as I'm expanding this year, I'm working really hard to not overexert. And finding that balance is tough.
Yes, all the overs is overfunction, overwhelm, like all the overs. We're over the overs, So expansion, I would say 3 things come up: openness, flexibility, and regulation. And we've touched on all of these, but openness to receive, openness to receive what it is we're called to do and working towards, the flexibility to receive it in the ways that it shows up that might be unexpected, and regulate it enough to be able to hold it and contain it without it destabilizing us and scaring us. Because oftentimes that's the biggest thing that we have to overcome is our own fear of what it means to be our fullest and most expanded selves. Because again, it speaks against the programming and the conditioning to be small, to be, polite, to be palatable, to be tolerable, to be controllable. And that's not who we were created to be. And so expansion looks like being able to hold and carry and nurture and birth, what you were put on this earth to do, in a way that is compassionate, rested, kind to yourself, that is done with grace and poise and in a regulated way that just shows your full humanity and all that you are and called to be.
I love that, especially because I think so many of us have been taught and really tricked that this has to be hard, that we don't have to rely on each other, that we don't need each other, right? Like, I can't tell you how many women I talk to, and it's very clear that there is so much shame tied to asking for help.
Yeah.
There's so much shame and I don't mean even just in the clinical setting. That, of course, we know is rooted in a lot of shame and taboo. But even asking your sisters, asking your community, your neighbors for help. You know, I'm so blessed that I have a neighbor across the street, actually two neighbors across the street. I'm looking at their houses right now. Two of my neighbors. When I tell you, we will ask each other for stuff all the time. You know, can you grab a package off my porch? Absolutely. Can you, I'm out of town. Can you pull our trash bin back in? Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no, not only is there no shame in that, but I think there's sort of like an ice that breaks between women when you allow someone to help you and when you let them know that you are also safe, right? I talk about this all the time. I do not profess to be a perfect woman, baby. I am imperfect. I am very much, I'm quite imperfect. I'm very flawed. But what I am is safe. And what I'm going to be with you, what I'm going to be with my child, with my neighbors, with my community is safe. That's my goal. That's all I can promise you. That's what I strive for. Thank you for sharing that kind of that reframe that we all have hopefully have the freedom and the mental space to be able to do. Yeah. All right. I want to give you 3 little rapid fire questions. Okay. And we're going to them through the bloom and the build phase. So in the blooming phase, what is one awareness shift that you think every single woman needs right now?
Be aware of what feels unsafe. Be aware of the people that you do not feel safe around, you know, where you just feel very dysregulated, on edge, uncomfortable, and there's a pattern of that. Be aware of the work and types of work that feel unsafe and unnerving and untriggering, the types of settings, and pay attention to that and trust yourself enough, trust your discernment, your sense of discernment enough to know that and to listen and to respond accordingly.
Yes. And what is one habit that you believe and you have experienced, whether it be yourself firsthand or with clients, what is a habit that protects a woman's mental wellness? Like one habit that she can pick up today?
I would say learning to, if not say no, say, let me get back to you. Because oftentimes being able to say no confidently is a process. And sometimes we're uncertain in the moment. And so giving ourselves the spaciousness to say, you know what, let me circle back. Let me get back to you so that we get to make a decision from a regulated state rather than a, alarmed or, caught off guard state.
Yes. And what is one truth about power, which I love that you brought that into the conversation, because I think we're taught as women to not want that, not strive for that, not carry that, not wield it. What is the truth about power that you wish more women would understand?
Yeah, power is not a dirty word. It is not a dirty thing. It has been made dirty, by a lot of the people who are currently in power, who have been in power for, thousands of years. But power is our birthright. Power is what we are, who we are. It's our ability to create, to nurture, to build, to make something out of nothing, to love. And it is something that each one of us have in our own, unique way. We get to express it. But power is also what we embody when we are rested.
I mean, listen, we can talk every day as far as I'm concerned. This is the new podcast now, y'all.
Let's do it.
We have officially changed the format. Dr. Hypolite's coming back every day. This conversation to me, and I feel like women sometimes need this. We need permission slips.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and we talk about peer pressure. Well, I believe in peer permission. And this felt like a permission slip for me and for, I'm sure, other women who are going to be listening to this to have a reality check. And you may not be able to do everything on her list today. You may not be able to do all of the steps that Dr. Hypolite talks about on her platforms or in her therapy sessions, or she may not be able to diagnose you and treat you today. But I think if you can take anything away from this, it's that you have permission. You have permission to transform and to continue to go through those phases, even if you're not doing it in a perfect aesthetic way. Do it messy as long as you do it. So let everyone know how we can find you, how we can work with you, connect with you, and learn more about the amazing work that you do, Dr. Hypolite.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Hypolite. I'm a double board certified psychiatrist and I'm licensed in 21 states. my area of specialty is to help Black women leaders stop grinding and start thriving. And I do that by really focusing on the areas of burnout, high functioning depression, high functioning anxiety. And I do that through the types of therapy that I talked about, that I tailor towards the unique and complex things that impact, Black women in very specific ways. And I also lean heavily into non-pharmacologic and non-medication supplements, holistic supplements that really help with nervous system regulation. And so that is my work. That is my passion. That is my joy. And more details can be found on my website at drhypolite.com.
Amazing. And I will, of course, link everything for everyone in any caption that we have, whether it be on YouTube or wherever. And thank you so much for this. Thank you for all that you do for us and with us as a community leader. And we could talk to you all day. So we'll have to have you back at some point.
I would love that. And again, thank you for all the ways that you pour into us, through your channels and through your products, through the work and the collective that you do. It really is impactful. You are seen, you're reaching the girlies. Like we see you and we feel you and we are thankful. So please continue to do it as you feel energized and called to do it. And we will be here listening and receiving the downloads.
Likewise. Thank you, Dr. Hypolite.
Thank you.
And thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for tuning in. If this resonated with you, please follow, subscribe, share a rating, share a like, and share this with someone else who may get some benefit and some joy and some information from it as well. Until next time.